There's a scar here on my arm that you can't see in this photograph. There's another one on my soul that still aches when it rains hard and the wind hits the window the same way it used to hit that house in Cedar Valley. My name is Dorothy Mae Williams. I'm 82 years old, mother of 5, grandmother of 12, and I have a story I've kept buried so long it nearly suffocated me. This picture here in my hand, that's me at 16. Look closely at my eyes. Do you see that look of someone who's seen too much? That way of smiling only with your mouth but not with your heart. This was taken 3 days after the night that changed everything. The night I finally understood I had 2 choices: die slowly or fight back. Before I begin, I want you to know something. This isn't a victim story. This is a war story. And I won. Cedar Valley, Kentucky, 1954. I was 12 years old when my mama died in childbirth trying to give me a baby brother. The baby died too. Daddy said it was my fault because I'd prayed so hard to God for a sibling. Our house was small, made of old wood that creaked when the wind blew. 2 rooms and a kitchen where Daddy kept bottles of cheap whiskey under the sink. He worked in the coal mine when he worked, which wasn't always. Sometimes he'd stay out for weeks, saying he was sick. Sick with hangovers, I knew. After Mama died, I became the woman of the house overnight. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to make black coffee strong like he liked it. I'd cook beans and fatback on the wood stove. I'd wash clothes in the rusted metal tub in the backyard, with lye soap that left my hands cracked and bleeding. Daddy would look at me with those bloodshot eyes and say, "At least you're good for something, Dorothy Mae. Your mama was useless, but at least you learned to work." I didn't know what to say back. I was 12 years old and just wanted someone to hold me like Mama used to. It was just him and me. Just the 2 of us in that house that always smelled of sweat, coal dust, and liquor. The wooden floors had dark stains where he'd spill whiskey. The walls were thin, and I knew the neighbors could hear when he yelled at me. But they'd pretend they saw nothing when I showed up at school with bruises. "Stubborn girl," they'd say when they saw me on the street. "Needs a firm hand. Single father ain't easy, poor Herbert." Poor him. I wanted to scream. What about me? Didn't anyone feel sorry for me? I attended Cedar Valley Elementary, 1 room with all ages mixed together. I missed a lot because I had to take care of the house, or because I was too hurt to show up. The teacher, Miss Thompson, a thin woman with round glasses, would sometimes look at me in a way, like she wanted to ask something. But she never asked. Once she called me to her desk and said, "Dorothy, you're a smart girl. Don't give up on your education." And she gave me a book to take home. I hid it under my mattress because I knew Daddy would be angry if he found out at night. I'd lay on my thin mattress on the living room floor and listen to Daddy snoring drunk in his bed. It was the only time I felt safe. When he was asleep, I didn't exist. I could breathe deep, cry quietly, dream I was somewhere else. Sometimes I'd look through the small window and see lights in other houses. I'd wonder what it was like to have family dinner, to talk, to laugh. I couldn't remember the last time I'd really laughed. Back then I still had hope that things would get better. That Daddy would stop drinking. That he'd wake up one day and look at me the way other fathers looked at their children, with love, with pride. I was just a child wanting to be loved. But love never came. What came every day was fear. For years I thought it was normal. That every child got beaten when they did something wrong. That all fathers came home cursing and looking for reasons to hit. Daddy had his rules and I memorized each one like multiplication tables. Food ready at 6 sharp, house clean without a speck of dust, laundry washed and ironed, and me quiet. Very quiet. "Children don't have a voice," he'd say, pointing his finger in my face. "Children obey and that's it. If you open your mouth to complain, you'll get it worse." But the problem was I could never get all the rules right at the same time. It was like trying to keep plates spinning, one always fell. If the food was ready on time, the house wasn't clean enough. If the house was sparkling, I had a smart mouth because I was sweaty from the effort. If I stayed too quiet, I was throwing a tantrum and being provocative with that silence. There was no way to win. Never did I started believing something was deeply wrong with me inside. That I was born defective, made to be beaten, to be yelled at, to be treated like a stray dog that showed up in the yard. "If you weren't so stubborn," he'd say after hitting me, "it wouldn't have to hurt so much. You choose to suffer." And I believed it. My God, how I believed it at school, when I saw other girls laughing with their fathers at pickup time. Or when Miss Thompson spoke kindly to a student who got their lesson wrong. I felt something strange in my chest. Like I'd lost something important that I didn't even know existed. Once I saw Mary Lou Henderson crying at recess because her father had spoken sternly to her for coming home late the night before. Crying. Over a scolding. No yelling, no hitting, just a serious conversation. I remember watching her cry and thinking, she doesn't know what real punishment is. That's when I understood I was different from other children. That my life was different. That what happened in my house didn't happen in everyone's house. But instead of making me angry, it made me ashamed. A deep shame that settled in my chest like a stone. I thought I deserved my life because I was worse than other children. More bad, more stubborn, more wrong. Why else would God have given me a father like that? Why else couldn't I be good enough for him to love me? I started hating myself. I hated the way I walked, talked, breathed too loud when I was nervous. I hated that my hair never looked neat like other girls. I hated that my clothes always smelled of cheap soap and sweat. Dirty night. Lying on the floor, I'd make promises to God. If you teach me how to be good, I promise I'll obey everything. I promise I'll make Daddy love me. But God didn't answer. Or if he did, I couldn't understand. What I didn't know yet was that some chains are so heavy we end up thinking they're part of our body. That we carry them so long we forget what it's like to walk free. But I was still going to learn. I had just turned 13 when the first beating happened that I remember every detail of. Funny how memory works. I don't remember my birthday that year, don't remember if I got anything, but I remember every second of that March night that it was a Tuesday. I know because Tuesday was the day to wash the good dishes, those white porcelain plates that had belonged to my mama. Daddy had come home early from the mine and I thought, thank God he's sober today. I was making bean soup with leftover bacon from Sunday. It smelled good, the house was clean, I'd even managed to pick some yellow forsythia branches from the neighbor's yard to make the table prettier. Daddy sat at the old wooden table and I served the soup in Mama's plate, the one with a little painted rose on the rim that I was always extra careful with. I was carrying it back to the kitchen when I stepped on a loose floorboard. The plate slipped from my hand like wet soap. I still remember the sound. It wasn't just the porcelain breaking on the wooden floor. It was like all the silence in the house had exploded with it. The little white pieces scattered everywhere, some so small they looked like dust. Daddy didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the shards, then at me, then at the shards again. I dropped to my knees and started gathering the pieces with my hands, cutting my fingers, saying, sorry, Daddy. It was an accident. I'll fix it, I'll fix it. But there was no fixing it. Mama's plate was destroyed. Stand up, he said in a voice I'd never heard before. Lower than a whisper, but scarier than a scream. I stood up with my hands full of blood from the cuts. You broke your mama's plate. It was an accident, Daddy. The floorboard. You broke the only pretty plate left in this house. He got up slowly from the chair, and that's when I saw there was an empty bottle on the floor beside him. He'd been drinking in secret before dinner. His eyes weren't red, they were black. Take off your belt, he said that I didn't understand. Take off your belt and give it to me. My hand shook so much I could barely undo the buckle. It was a thin brown leather belt that had been Mama's. I handed it to him. Lean over the chair. That's when I understood what was going to happen. Until then, he'd only given me slaps, pushes, hair pulling. But never this. Daddy, please. The first lash across my back made me scream in a way I didn't know I could. The second knocked me to the floor. The third I don't even know where it hit because I was rolling trying to protect myself. Stop moving, he yelled. Stay still and take it. But I couldn't stay still. My body moved on its own trying to escape the pain. That made him even angrier. I don't know how many there were. Could have been 10, could have been 20. At some point I stopped screaming and just made low sounds like a wounded animal. When it stopped I stayed on the floor without moving. I heard him throw the belt on the table, heard him say, now you've learned to be careful with things. Clean up this mess. And he left. I stayed there, lying among the shards, my back on fire, cleaning my blood and gathering pieces of Mama's plate with cut hands. Each piece I picked up I thought, it'll never be the same. Never again. It was that night that fear stopped being just a feeling and became a person living inside me. A person who whispered in my ear, be careful. Be careful with everything. Anything can be a reason for him to break you like that plate. And from then on I lived carefully. Very carefully. Too carefully. After that night, I became a different person. It was like they'd replaced my brain with a clock that only thought about not giving him reasons. Don't give reasons, don't give reasons. Don't give reasons that I'd wake up at 5 in the morning even when he didn't have to work. I'd sweep the house twice a day. I'd wash dishes that were already clean before using them. I'd walk on tiptoe to not make noise. I'd breathe quietly so I wouldn't be making drama, like he said that I had a list in my head that never ended. Check if the stove was clean 3 times before he got home. Fold his clothes exactly the way he liked, shirts face down, pants folded in half. Don't look at him when he was eating because children who stare are thinking nonsense. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always something wrong. That if I cleaned the whole house and left one speck of dust on a high shelf I couldn't even reach, he'd find it. If I cooked exactly like he'd asked, the food was tasteless or overcooked. If I stayed quiet, I was mute as a mule. If I spoke, I was chattering. I started having nightmares every night. I'd dream I was walking in a field full of eggs on the ground, and no matter how careful I was, I always stepped on one. And when the egg broke, it turned into Mama's plate shattering on the floor again. At school, Miss Thompson asked why I was always tired. I made up that Daddy was sick and I took care of him at night. It wasn't a lie, he was sick with drink and anger. Dorothy, she told me one afternoon, you're very thin. Are you eating right? The truth was I'd stopped eating in front of him because chewing made noise, and noise irritated him. So I'd eat in secret, little pieces of bread, leftover beans when he went out. Yes, teacher. She looked at me in a way that made me want to cry and tell her everything. But then I remembered Daddy always said, what happens at home stays at home. If you go talking nonsense to strangers, you'll see what's good for you. So I said nothing. The worst part was I'd started believing that if I could be perfect, really perfect, without a single mistake, he'd stop hitting me. That he'd look at me one day and say, Dorothy May, you've become a very good girl. I fantasized about that. I'd imagine him hugging me, calling me his dear daughter like fathers did in movies at Cedar Valley Cinema. I'd imagine him proud of me, telling the neighbors how hardworking and obedient I was. But the more I tried to be perfect, the worse it got. It was like he could smell my desperation, and that made him even angrier. One night, after he'd slapped me because the coffee was too weak, I locked myself in the small bathroom and looked in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The girl looking back at me had sunken eyes, dull hair, a purple mark on her cheek. I whispered softly, what did you do wrong? What did you do to deserve this? And the girl in the mirror couldn't answer. That I started having conversations with myself. If you clean better, he'll stop. If you don't cry when he yells, he'll see you're strong. If you endure silently, one day he'll get tired. But deep down in a very small part of my heart that I tried to pretend didn't exist, a voice whispered, what if he never stops? What if you're going to be miserable forever? I'd cover that voice forcefully. Couldn't think about that. Had to believe that one day things would get better. Had to believe I could earn his love by being good enough. Because if I didn't believe that, what would be left for me? Just emptiness. And fear. And the certainty that I wasn't worth anything anyway. So I kept trying. Kept cleaning, obeying, disappearing. Kept believing it was my fault and that I could fix it. For 2 whole years, I lived in that cycle. Until something started cracking inside. I was 15 when I found 25 cents under the old living room sofa. It was a small coin, but when I held it in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Daddy was sleeping off Saturday's hangover, so I ran to the backyard and buried the coin under the guava tree Mama had planted. I stared at the little hole in the dirt thinking, this is the beginning. The beginning of what? I didn't know exactly. But it was something mine. Something he couldn't take from me. From then on, I started saving everything I could. Pennies I found on the grocery store floor when I went to buy sugar. Nickels left over when he sent me to buy cigarettes and didn't check the change because he was too busy staring at the bottom of his bottle. Once, I found a whole $1 at the laundromat and nearly fainted from happiness. Every coin went to the same place, under the guava tree. At night, when he was snoring drunk, I'd go there with an old spoon and check my treasure. I'd count the coins one by one, imagining how much money I'd need to get out of there. To buy a bus ticket, rent a room, eat until I found work. That I wasn't just hiding money. I started storing food too. A piece of bread wrapped in clean cloth, Some potatoes that went bad but were actually fine. Canned goods I said were finished but hid in the back of the cupboard behind the dish towels that I'd created a detailed plan in my head. One day, when he went out drinking with his mining buddies at Johnson's bar, and was late coming back, I'd take my money, my food, and leave. Where to? Maybe Louisville, where I'd heard they hired girls to work in factories. Or maybe Lexington, where Miss Thompson's cousin lived. The fantasy kept me alive. Lying on the floor, looking at the ceiling full of water stains, I'd imagine what it would be like. I'd arrive in a small town where nobody knew me, where nobody knew I was the daughter of that drunk Herbert. I'd find work in a store or a good family's house. I'd rent a little room just for me, with a real bed and a window that faced the morning sun. And nobody would yell at me. Nobody would hit me. Nobody would tell me I was worthless except for cleaning and cooking. But every time the opportunity came, when he went out and was late coming back, I'd freeze. I'd stand in the kitchen, looking at the peeling wooden door, and couldn't take a single step. My body felt heavy as lead. What if he finds me? I'd think. What if he comes after me? What if it's worse out there? What if I can't find work? What if nobody wants a dirty, ignorant girl like me? Because as terrible as my life was, it was the only world I knew. The old house, the smell of whiskey mixed with sweat, his screams echoing off the thin walls. It was all familiar. Bad but familiar. And the unknown terrified me more than the known. One October night, he came home so drunk he could barely stand. He knocked over the table, knocked down a chair, cursed words I didn't even know the meaning of, and passed out on the living room floor with his mouth open. I stared at him there, snoring like a pig, with a puddle of drool forming on the floor, and thought, now. It's now or never. I went to the guava tree with my heart beating so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I dug up my money. $3.47. A fortune to me. I got the bundle of food I'd hidden behind the firewood. I put my least torn dress, Mama's sweater, and her photo in a paper bag that I got to the door. I put my trembling hand on the cold metal doorknob. And I couldn't open it. I stood there, shaking like a green stick, with my hand on the door, cold sweat, and I couldn't. It was like there was an invisible chain pulling me back. A voice in my head, that sounded exactly like his voice, saying, "You can't live alone. You're too weak. Too stupid. You'll starve on the road like an abandoned animal." I went back to my mattress and cried until I had no more tears. The next day he woke up with a headache and didn't even remember passing out on the floor. I served strong black coffee as always, cleaned the house as always, pretended nothing had happened. But something inside me had changed forever, that I'd discovered I was a prisoner. But worse than that, I'd discovered I was a prisoner who held her own chains. Because the door wasn't locked. He never locked the door. I could have left any time. But I couldn't. Fear was stronger than the will to be free. I kept saving money, kept planning escape, but now I knew I was lying to myself. It wasn't a real plan. It was just a fantasy to keep me sane, to give me something to hope for. Sometimes I'd take the buried coins and stare at them. One day, I'd whisper to the wind, "One day I'll have courage." But the day didn't come. And every time I couldn't leave, I hated myself a little more. It wasn't just him hurting me now. I was hurting myself, calling myself a coward, weak, useless. For a whole year, I lived in that cruel cycle. Plan, gather courage, freeze at the last moment, and hate myself afterward. Until he did something that changed everything. Something that showed me there are things worse than the fear of leaving. The fear of staying and dying slowly. 16 years old. I was 16 when I realized hiding bruises had become an art I mastered better than anything else in life. I'd learned that cheap makeup powder mixed with a little Vaseline covered purple marks on my face. That long sleeves hid finger marks on my arms. That walking slowly disguised when my ribs hurt too much to breathe deep. That smiling when someone asked if everything was okay was more convincing than saying, "I'm fine," with a closed face. But the worst wasn't the injuries that showed. It was the lie I had to carry every day like a heavy mask glued to my face. At school, when someone asked why I was limping, I fell down the stairs helping Daddy fix the roof. When they asked about the cut on my lip, I hit my mouth on the cupboard door when I was cleaning. When they asked about my black eye, got hit by a ball playing with the boys on the street. When they asked why I wore long sleeves in the heat, I have a rash on my arm, it looks ugly. The lies came out so naturally that sometimes I almost believed them. It was easier than the truth. Because the truth was too big, too heavy, too ugly to fit in normal conversation. The truth hurt whoever heard it, and I didn't want to hurt anyone. It was enough that I was already hurt. Miss Thompson had been transferred to another school at the end of the previous year, and the new teacher, Mrs. Mitchell, was an older woman who paid attention to nothing but math and reading lessons. Better that way. Fewer questions for me to invent answers to. Fewer worried looks for me to avoid. But there was one person who wasn't easy to fool. Lily Cooper, a new girl who had moved from Nashville with her family when her father got work in the mine. She sat in the desk next to mine, and had a way of looking that made me nervous. Like she could see through my lies. "Dorothy," she said one day at recess while we chewed our sandwiches under the big tree in the yard, "you never talk about your family." "There's not much to talk about," I replied, fidgeting with the peel of an orange I'd brought from home. "Everyone talks about family. I've told 1,000 stories about my little brother, his mischief, our fights. But you, it's like you don't have a past. Like your life started yesterday." I laughed awkwardly. "That's silly, Lily. Your father works in the mine, right?" "My dad works there now too." "He mentioned your father." My blood ran cold. The sandwich stopped halfway to my mouth. "What did he say?" That he drinks a lot. And that." She stopped, looking at me carefully, like she was stepping on broken glass. "Dorothy, if you need to talk about anything at all." "I don't need anything," I said louder than intended, startling a younger girl playing nearby. "My father is hardworking and honest. He just has a beer after work like any man. Your father shouldn't be spreading gossip." Lily looked at me like she was seeing through my lie, through my mask, straight to the pain I was trying to hide. But she didn't insist. At least not that day at a home. The situation was worse than ever. Daddy had been suspended from the mine for 2 weeks for showing up drunk on a Monday morning. The supervisor had sent him home to think about what he wanted from life. That meant less money and more time at home. Much more time for him to invent what was wrong. More time to look for reasons to take out the anger he felt about life that he'd created new rules that changed every week. Now I couldn't leave the house even to go to the grocery store alone. 16-year-old girl on the street alone becomes a whore, he'd say, spitting on the ground. "You'll stay here where I can watch you proper." The house became an even smaller prison than before. I only left for school, and even then he'd pick me up every afternoon at the door, looking at me like I'd done something terrible just by being away from him for a few hours. One April afternoon, Lily tried to talk to me when Daddy came to pick me up. He was late and I was nervous, knowing this would cause trouble. "Hi, Mr. Williams," she said politely, the way well-raised girls talk to adults. "I'm Lily, Dorothy's classmate. She's very smart in English class." Daddy looked at me with a face I knew well. Pure danger. "Dorothy doesn't need friends," he said roughly, with that voice of someone who doesn't accept argument. "She has plenty to help with at home." "But sir, maybe she could come to my house one day. My mother makes some cakes." "Girl," he cut her off, and I saw Lily instinctively step back. Even she, who didn't know Daddy, could sense the danger. "You don't know this family. Mind your own business, that's better." On the way home he didn't say anything. But I knew from the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped my hand too tight, that I was going to pay for it. "Who is that girl?" he asked as soon as we closed the house door. "Just a classmate, Daddy. From school." "Just a classmate who wants to stick her nose where she wasn't invited. Talking about cake in her house like you're some rich man's daughter. She didn't do anything wrong. She was just being polite." That's when he slapped me. In front of the living room window, where any neighbor could see if they looked. "Don't talk to me in that tone," he growled, his face red with anger. "And I don't want that girl near you anymore. If I find out you're talking, that you're planning something, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot." That night, lying on the cold floor, I thought about Lily. How she'd tried to be a real friend. How she'd stepped back when she saw Daddy, but not from fear, from understanding. How she'd probably already figured everything out, and that's why she was trying to help me. And I felt shame. A deep, hot shame that someone my age had seen how I was treated. How small I was, how I lowered my head. How I accepted everything silently like a beaten dog at school. I started avoiding Lily. I'd sit somewhere else, eat lunch alone in the back of the yard, run out when class ended. She tried to talk to me a few times, but I always made up an excuse to get away, until one day she cornered me in the school bathroom. Dorothy, stop this. I know what's happening. You don't know anything, I said, but my voice was shaky and broken. My dad said your father is violent. And I see the bruises you try to hide. I see how you get nervous when someone speaks loud. I see how you flinch when someone moves too fast near you. I started crying without being able to stop. You can't do anything, I sobbed. Nobody can. This is my life. This is how things are. This is how it's always been. It doesn't have to be this way. There are people who can help. No, I screamed, my voice echoing off the empty bathroom walls. If someone interferes, it'll be worse for me. Much worse. You don't understand how he gets when he's really angry. Lily hugged me then, and it was the first time in years someone had touched me with care, with gentleness, like I was something precious that could break. I understand, she whispered. But when you're ready, when you want to get out of this, I'll help you. My family will help you. For 2 weeks, I walked through school knowing someone knew the complete truth. It was scary and comforting at the same time. Scary because the secret wasn't just mine anymore, because now someone looked at me with pity. Comforting because for the first time in years I wasn't completely alone in the world. Until Daddy found out that he saw us talking in the schoolyard one May afternoon. Saw Lily give me a note folded in 4. And that night, when we got home, he asked me a question that changed everything. What does that girl know about our family? And I knew my life was about to get much, much worse. That question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. What does that girl know about our family? Daddy was standing in the kitchen doorway, blocking my exit with those eyes that never blinked. Nothing, Daddy. She doesn't know anything. Liar. He walked slowly to where I stood, like a cat approaching a wounded mouse. I saw you whispering. Saw her give you something. My heart raced. Lily's note was still in my pocket. It just said, "You're not alone," but if he found it. It was just the math homework Daddy she lent me. The slap came so fast I didn't even see it. My head turned to the side and I tasted blood in my mouth. I said, "Don't lie to me." His voice was low, controlled, and that was worse than when he screamed. That girl has been filling your head with ideas. Telling you that you don't have to obey your father. Telling you that you can leave home whenever you want. No, Daddy. She never. Shut up. The scream made me shrink completely. He started pacing back and forth in the small kitchen like a caged animal. For years, he said, more to himself than to me. 4 years since your mother died. I raised you alone. Taught you to be a proper girl. And now a stranger comes wanting to ruin everything. Daddy, please? Did you tell her I correct you when you do wrong? No. Did you tell her that sometimes you get spanked when you disobey? I never told her anything. But he wasn't listening to me anymore. He was lost in his own anger, talking to himself. These outsiders, they don't understand. They think they know how to raise children better than the child's own father. Think they can interfere. That's when he saw my hand on my pocket, trying to hide the note. What are you hiding? Nothing. Show me your hand. Daddy. Show me your hand. I took my hand out of my pocket, trembling. He lunged forward and stuck his hand in my pocket before I could react. He found the paper that he opened it slowly, read the 4 little words. You are not alone. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Daddy looked at the paper, then at me, then at the paper again. His face turned a color I'd never seen, dark red, almost purple. So this is it. His voice came out in a terrifying whisper. You're telling our business to strangers. Making this family look bad. Daddy, it's not. Making me look like a monster. I never said anything. Liar. He pushed me so hard I flew and hit my back against the wall. My head hit the rough plaster and I saw little stars. You know what happens to girls who spread lies about their fathers? He was coming toward me again. You know what happens to girls who shame their families? I tried to get up, but he kicked me in the stomach. The pain was so intense I couldn't even scream. I could only curl up, trying to breathe. Get up, he ordered. I tried, but I could barely move. I said, get up. He pulled me by the hair until I was standing. Then he threw me back against the wall, but this time with more force. I heard a crack in my back and sharp pain shot through my whole body. "Now you're going to learn," he said, taking off his belt. But it wasn't my belt this time. It was his, wide and heavy with a metal buckle. "Daddy, please, I'll never talk to her again." Too late. The first lash threw me to the floor. The second made me scream. The third I heard another crack, louder than the first, and the pain in my ribs became unbearable. I stopped counting after the fifth. At some point, I stopped screaming and just made low noises like a wounded animal. At some point I stopped trying to protect myself and just lay there, waiting for it to end. When it stopped, I stayed on the floor without moving. Not because I was defying him, but because I literally couldn't move without feeling like someone was sticking a knife in my ribs. "Get up and clean this mess," he said, throwing the belt on the table. I tried to get up and almost fainted from pain. I said, "Get up." Can't. I whispered. That's when I saw something on his face that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't anger anymore. It was satisfaction. Like he'd enjoyed seeing me so broken I couldn't even obey a simple command. And that's when I understood he was never going to stop. No matter how much I obeyed, how much I tried to be perfect, he was going to continue until he broke me completely or killed me. And for the first time lying on that cold floor bleeding inside and out, I understood I had two choices: die slowly, or fight back. Even if it killed me trying. For 3 days I couldn't get out of bed. Not bed, the mattress on the floor, which was stained with my blood and tears. Daddy said I was being dramatic, and that if I didn't get up to make food I'd go without eating. But I literally couldn't move without feeling like someone was cutting my ribs with a knife. Every breath was torture. Every time I tried to turn on my side, the pain was so intense I saw black dots in front of my eyes. On the third day, when the pain subsided enough for me to crawl to the kitchen, I saw myself in the small cracked mirror hanging near the sink. The person looking back at me didn't look like me. My face was swollen on one side, with a cut on my lip that had cracked and started to get infected. My left eye was purple and closed. But the worst were my eyes, both of them. They were empty, like the real person had left and only a shell remained. Daddy was sitting at the table, eating cold beans straight from the pot. "Finally decided to stop throwing a tantrum," he said without looking at me. "Tomorrow you go back to school. And if anyone asks anything, you know what to say." I knew. I always knew. At school, I said I'd fallen off my bike and hit a rock. Mrs. Mitchell looked at my swollen face and just said, "Be more careful, Dorothy." Didn't even ask what bike, when everyone knew my family didn't have money for food, let alone a bicycle. Lily saw me in the hallway and ran up to me. "My God, Dorothy, what happened?" "Fell off my bike." I repeated the automatic lie, but my voice came out broken. She looked into my eyes, the eye that still opened, and I saw when she understood. I saw the exact moment she realized it hadn't been an accident at all. "He did this because you talked to me, didn't he?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "Dorothy, we have to tell someone. The principal, the police, or..." "No." The word came out so hard and final that even I was startled. "You don't understand. If someone interferes, he'll kill me. For real." "But..." "Stop, Lily. Please. You'll only make things worse for me." She tried to argue, but I walked away and didn't talk to her for the rest of the day. With each class that passed, I felt her watching me, worried, wanting to help. But help was the last thing I could accept. At home, Daddy had instituted new rules. Now I couldn't even look in the direction of the school when he picked me up. I had to walk with my head down, 2 steps behind him like an obedient dog. "People are looking at you," he said on the way home. "They're seeing that you're a poorly behaved girl who doesn't know how to act. That embarrasses me." I wanted to scream. "The one who embarrasses me is you. You're the one who showed up drunk at my school. You're the one who left me looking like this." But I just lowered my head even more and mumbled, "Sorry, Daddy." The nights became a different kind of hell. Before, he'd hit me when he was angry when I did something wrong. Now he hit me for pleasure. Because he liked seeing me crouched in the corner of the room. Because he liked the power of making me cry with just a look. He discovered he didn't need the belt anymore. He just had to raise his hand and I'd already shrink completely, protecting myself. He found this funny. "Look at that." He'd laugh, making the motion of hitting me without touching. "Look how you get. Like a scared little mouse." And I really felt like that. Like a little mouse trapped in a cage with a cat that played with me before eating me. I stopped eating properly. Not because there was no food, but because my stomach was so tight with fear that I threw up almost everything I tried to swallow. In 2 weeks, my clothes were already too loose that I stopped sleeping too. I'd stay awake on the mattress, listening to every sound in the house, every movement from his room next door. When he snored, I'd relax a little. When he stopped snoring, my heart would race at T-school. My grades plummeted. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The letters danced in front of my eyes, numbers didn't make sense. Mrs. Mitchell called me to her desk. "Dorothy, what's happening? You've always been one of the best students." "I'm not sleeping well. Daddy is sick and I take care of him at night." More lies. Always more lies. Lily stopped trying to talk to me after a week. I could see her watching me from afar, with that pitying look that made me feel angry and ashamed at the same time. Angry because pity wouldn't help me. Ashamed because I really was pathetic. One afternoon, I was in the school bathroom when I heard 2 girls talking in the hallway. "Dorothy Williams is acting strange lately. My mom said her father is violent, that he drinks too much. Poor thing. Imagine living in a house like that. At least now we know why she's so weird." Weird. That's how they saw me. The weird girl with a drunk, violent father. The girl everyone pitied but nobody wanted near. That night, lying on the floor, looking at the water stains on the ceiling, I did the math in my head. If things continued like this, if he kept hitting me harder and harder, more and more for any reason, I wouldn't survive until 18. I wouldn't even survive until 17. And for the first time, I thought about something that scared me more than any beating. I thought maybe it would be better that way. Maybe it would be better if he went too far once and ended it all, because I was so tired. So tired of being afraid, of pretending, of hurting, of waking up every day knowing it would be worse than the day before. But then I remembered my mama. The photo of her that I hid under the mattress. What she would say if she knew I was thinking about giving up. And a little voice, almost a whisper, spoke from deep in my soul. "No, Dorothy May. You're stronger than that." I didn't know where that voice came from. But it was right that I was stronger than that. I just didn't know yet how to use that strength. The night that changed everything was on a Tuesday in October. I remember because it was laundry day, and I'd spent the whole day scrubbing his shirts in the tub until my hands were raw. Daddy had come home later than usual. I heard Jimmy Henderson's old truck drop him off in front of the house. Heard both of them laughing loud, cursing, making noise that woke the neighbors. When he came in, I knew he was much worse than other times. He wasn't just drunk. He was in a rage I'd never seen. His eyes were 2 black holes, and he was stumbling not just from alcohol, but from pure anger. "Where's my dinner?" was the first thing he said. "It's on the stove, Daddy. Keeping warm." "Why isn't it on the table?" "You didn't say what time you'd be home, so I left it on the..." He slapped me so hard it knocked me to the floor. "Don't give me excuses. Food should be on the table when I get home." I got up, went to the stove, got the plate of beans with fatback I'd made. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it that I put it on the table in front of him. He looked, stirred it with his fork, tasted it. "It's cold. I can heat it up again." "It's cold and has no salt." "Daddy, I put salt in it." "It has no salt," he screamed, pounding his fist on the table. The plate jumped and some beans scattered that he got up from the chair, went to the sink, got the salt shaker, and poured salt on top of the food. A lot of salt. Salt until it formed a white mountain. "Now eat it." "What?" "You heard me. Eat this food you made." "Daddy, there's too much salt." "Eat it." I took the fork with a trembling hand and tasted it. The salt burned my tongue. Went down my throat like ground glass. I spat it out. "Can't even eat your own food," he laughed, but it was an ugly laugh without joy. "Useless, just like your mother." "Don't talk about my mother." The words came out before I could think. They came out quietly, but he heard. The silence that followed was different from all the others. Heavier. More dangerous. "What did you say?" My blood froze, but something inside me, something that had been quiet for years, wouldn't let me swallow the words back. I said, "Don't talk about my mother." He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. You're defying me?" I should have lowered my head. Should have apologized. Should have gone back to being little, scared Dorothy. But something was different inside me. A small flame that had lit and didn't want to go out anymore. My mother wasn't useless. She was good. She loved me. His face turned purple with rage. Your mother was a weakling who died and left me with you. Liar. I screamed, and it was the first time in my life I'd screamed at him. She died trying to give you the son you wanted. She died because you forced her to have child after child. He stood still for a second, shocked. Then he started walking toward me, slowly, like a predator. Now you think you're smart, huh? Now you think you can talk to me like that? I can tell the truth. The truth? He laughed. The truth is you're a burden. The truth is if you hadn't been born, your mother would still be alive. The truth is I should have drowned you when you were a baby. Each word was like a stab, but instead of breaking me, they were feeding the flame inside me. Then why didn't you? I asked, standing up from the chair. Why didn't you get rid of me when you could? That's when he completely lost control. That he ran to the toolbox in the kitchen and came back with the old, heavy hammer he used to fix things around the house. The wooden handle was worn, but the metal head was still solid. Dangerous. Now you're going to learn, he said, raising the hammer above his head. Now you're going to learn to respect your father. He came at me with the hammer raised, and I knew with absolute certainty, that if that hammer hit me, I was going to die. And it was in that moment, with death coming toward me, that something inside me exploded. That it wasn't courage. It wasn't a plan. It was pure survival instinct. When he brought the hammer down, I threw myself to the side and it hit the wooden table. The sound was like a gunshot. I rolled on the floor, got up faster than I'd ever moved in my life, and when he tried to hit me again, I grabbed his arm. Let go, he screamed, but I didn't let go. For the first time in my life, I didn't obey. We fought for the hammer. He was stronger, but I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for all the years of pain, fear, humiliation. I was fighting for the girl he'd broken, and for the woman I wanted to become. At some point in the fight, I managed to wrench the hammer from his hand. I held it with both hands, raised it above my head, and looked into his eyes, and he saw something in my look that made him step back. Dorothy, he said, and for the first time in my life, I heard fear in his voice. Never again, I said, with the firmest voice that had ever come from my throat. Never again will you lay a finger on me. You don't have the courage. Yes, I do. And I did. Finally, I did. And if you try to hurt me again, I'll break you like you broke me all these years. We stood there, looking at each other. Me with the hammer in my hands, him with fear in his eyes. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. He was afraid of me. The war was over. And I had won. For 3 days after that night, Daddy and I lived in the same house like two strangers. He didn't talk to me, I didn't talk to him. But something fundamental had changed in the air between us. He didn't try to hit me again. That I kept the hammer under my mattress. Every night, before going to sleep, I'd run my hand over it, remembering that now I had a weapon. That now I could defend myself. Daddy started looking at me differently. Not with anger, with something I took time to understand. It was caution. He was being cautious with me. Of the daughter he'd raised to be small and scared. On the first morning after the fight, he came down to the kitchen and found coffee ready and the table set as always. I'd done exactly like I did every day. But when he sat down, I sat down too. Across the table, looking directly at him. Get up, he said quietly. No. That was it. One word. But in that word was everything that had changed. He looked at me for a long time, then lowered his eyes to his plate and ate in silence. On the second day, he tried to go back to normal. Dorothy, go to the store and get cigarettes. I'll go. But you're going to give me money and say please. His face turned red, but after a few seconds, he put $2 on the table. Please. When I came back from the store, he was sitting on the porch, staring into space. I handed him the change and cigarettes, and he mumbled a thank you so low I almost didn't hear it. On the third day, he tried to give me a harder order, to test how far my new courage went. You're going to stop going to school. I need you here at home. I'm not going to stop, I said, without even looking up from my plate of beans. I'm your father. You obey what I say. You are my father, I agreed. But you're not my owner anymore. He got up from the table, and for a moment I thought he was going to try to hit me again. My hand moved instinctively toward the hammer under the mattress. But he saw the movement. He saw that I was ready to fight again. And he left the house, slamming the door. That night, he came back drunker than ever. But instead of looking for a fight, he went straight to his room and locked the door. The next morning, when I woke up, he wasn't home. Jimmy Henderson's old truck had come to get him before sunrise. He stayed away for a whole week. Alone in the house, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I'd wake up when I wanted, eat when I was hungry, sit on the porch without watching the clock in fear of him coming home. Lily looked for me at school. "Dorothy, you're different. More free." "I am." "What happened?" I looked at her. This girl who had tried to help me when I couldn't help myself, and decided to tell the truth. I fought back. When Daddy came back, he brought a woman. A thin woman with bleached hair and rotten teeth, who laughed too loud and smelled like cheap perfume. "Dorothy, this is Dolores. She's going to live here with us." Dolores looked me up and down. "So you're the girl. Herbert told me you've been rebellious." "I've been strong." I corrected that. In the following days, it became clear that Daddy had brought Dolores not just as company, but as a kind of ally against me. He thought two people could control me again. But Dolores didn't know the old Dorothy. She only knew the new one. The Dorothy who didn't lower her head, who didn't apologize for existing, who took her place at the table and in the world. One night, during dinner, Dolores tried to give me an order. "Dorothy, go get more beer for us." "Get it yourself. Your father told me to boss you around when he's not around." I looked at Daddy, who was sitting right there at the table. "Daddy is here. And even if he wasn't, you don't boss me around." "Nobody does." Dolores looked at Daddy, expecting him to do something. But he just lowered his eyes to his plate. But that's when I understood something important. He hadn't told her about the hammer. Hadn't told her that I had fought with him and won. He'd made up some story about me being rebellious so he wouldn't have to admit that a 16-year-old girl had managed to put fear in him. 2 weeks after Dolores arrived, I woke up one morning and found a note on the kitchen table. "Dorothy, Dolores and I are going to Louisville to try life there. The house is yours now. You already proved you don't need a father anyway." Herbert, he had left. After 16 years telling me I was worthless, that I couldn't live alone, that I'd die if I left him. He had left and abandoned me. That I sat in the kitchen chair, holding the note, and started to cry. Not from sadness. From relief. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. The first months alone were the strangest of my life. I'd wake up every day expecting to hear his heavy footsteps in the kitchen. Expecting him to yell my name with that voice of someone already angry before even knowing why. But there was only silence. A silence so deep that sometimes it scared me more than the screaming. Because in silence, I didn't know how to behave. After 16 years being ordered around, controlled, living on tiptoe, I didn't know how to be free. The house seemed bigger and smaller at the same time. Bigger because now I could walk through all the rooms without fear. Smaller because it was just me there, alone with my thoughts and my memories. That I kept going to school, but it was hard to concentrate. Lily tried to talk to me, asked how I was, if I needed anything. But how do you explain that freedom also hurts? That after so long being broken, you don't know how to be whole. "Are you okay?" she asked one day at recess. "I'm free," I answered. "But I don't know yet what that means." At night, I'd sit on the front porch, the same porch where Mama used to sit when I was little, and look at the lights in other houses. I'd wonder what the families inside were like. If fathers spoke kindly to their children. If children laughed at the dinner table. If they hugged before going to sleep. Things I'd never had, but now knew existed. That I learned to cook for one person. I learned to make simple decisions. What clothes to wear, what time to wake up, what to eat for breakfast. It sounds silly, but when your whole life someone decides everything for you, even choosing between bread and crackers for breakfast becomes an achievement. But the nights were difficult. Alone in the dark, with no noise at all, my mind would go back to all the years of fear. I'd relive every beating, every scream, every humiliation. It was like my brain needed to process everything that had happened now that it was safe to feel. Some nights I'd cry until I had no more tears. Others, I'd feel anger so big I wanted to break something. Sometimes I did that. I'd break an old plate, throw a chair, scream alone in the empty house. And then I'd feel guilty, like I was still the girl who couldn't make noise. Money ran out quickly. Daddy hadn't left almost anything, and I needed to find work to pay the house bills. I got a job at the town laundromat, ironing clothes for other families. That IT was hard work, but I liked it. I liked transforming wrinkled clothes into smooth, sweet-smelling clothes. I liked seeing the before and after. It was like a metaphor for my own life. At the laundromat, I met other women. Women who had their own stories, their own pain. Mrs. Garcia, who had come from Mexico and was raising 3 children alone. Miss Ruby, a black woman who had survived segregation and now worked to support her sick mother. They taught me that I wasn't the only one who had suffered. That strength wasn't a rare thing. It was everywhere, in every woman who woke up every day and kept fighting. "Child," Miss Ruby said one day, seeing how I folded clothes with excessive care, "you don't have to be afraid of doing things wrong anymore. Nobody's going to hit you if you wrinkle a shirt." She was right. But 16 years of fear don't disappear in a few months. Gradually, I started discovering who I was when I wasn't afraid. I discovered that I liked to read. I read every book I could borrow from Cedar Valley's small library. I discovered I had a knack for numbers. I helped the other laundromat women do customer accounts. That I discovered that when nobody was telling me I was stupid, ugly, useless, I wasn't any of those things. But I also discovered that the scars weren't just on my body. They were on my soul. When someone spoke loud near me, I still flinched. When I saw a drunk man on the street, my heart still raced. When someone raised their hand too fast, I still closed my eyes expecting the blow. One night, almost a year after Daddy had left, I was sitting on the porch when a car stopped in front of the house. My heart froze. "He's back," was my first thought. But who got out of the car was a young man with light hair and a gentle smile. "Are you Dorothy Williams?" he asked. "I am. I'm James Thompson, nephew of your former teacher. She told me about you. Said you were very intelligent and might want to finish your studies." He offered me an opportunity to study at night, to get my high school diploma, maybe even go to college someday. It was the first time someone saw potential in me. The first time someone looked at my life and saw possibilities instead of problems. And it was in that moment, sitting on the porch of the house where I'd survived so much horror, that I understood my life was just beginning. Suffering had been my past, but the strength that grew from it would be my future. 3 years had passed since Daddy left. 3 years of learning to be Dorothy without fear, Dorothy with her own voice, Dorothy who made her own choices. That I had finished high school studying at night, like James Thompson offered me. It was hard, working at the laundromat during the day and studying at night. But every diploma I received was like a victory over all the times Daddy called me stupid. That I was 19 when I received a letter that changed something inside me. It was from Dolores, the woman Daddy had taken away with him. "Dorothy," the letter said, "Herbert died last week. Drunk, fell in the street and hit his head. Thought you should know. He talked about you sometimes, especially when he drank. Said he'd done wrong things. That you were stronger than he thought. I don't know if this matters now, but I thought I should tell you." I sat on the porch with the letter in my hand and waited to feel something. Sadness, relief, anger, forgiveness. Anything, but I only felt emptiness. An emptiness that wasn't bad or good. It was just the end of a chapter. Daddy was dead, and I was alive. And being alive, I had learned, was my greatest victory. That same week, I met a girl at the laundromat who reminded me a lot of myself. Sarah, 15 years old, who came to pick up clothes for her mother. She always had bruises she tried to hide. Always made up excuses. Always looked at the floor when she spoke. One day, she arrived with a black eye and a cut on her lip. "Fell down the stairs," she said. The same lie I repeated years ago. I stopped ironing and looked at her. "Sarah, can I ask you a question?" She nodded, still looking at the floor. "Who's hurting you?" She looked up, startled, like I'd guessed a terrible secret. "Nobody's. I fell." "I know what it's like," I said softly. "I know what it's like to live in fear every day. I know what it's like to make up lies to protect the person who's hurting you. I know what it's like to think you deserve it." She started to cry. "It's my stepfather," she whispered. "Mom doesn't believe me. Says I provoke him." My heart tightened. It was my story again, but in another girl. "Sarah, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. It's not your fault. It never was, never will be. And you don't have to accept this forever. But I can't do anything. I'm just a child. I thought that too. Until the day I discovered I was stronger than I thought. In the following months, I became a kind of big sister to Sarah. I taught her to hide money, to have a plan, to trust her own strength. But mainly, I taught her that she was worth more than fists told her. One day, she showed up at the laundromat smiling. "Dorothy," I told Aunt Helen. She took me to the police. Mom got angry, but my aunt said I can live with her. Seeing Sarah being saved, I understood something important. My pain hadn't been in vain. If I could use what I went through to help another girl save herself sooner, then all the suffering had a purpose. That night, for the first time in years, I went to my mother's grave. I'd avoided going there because it always reminded me of Daddy's cruel words about her. But now, kneeling in front of the simple granite headstone, I could see my mother differently. "Mama," I whispered, I understood. "You didn't die because you were weak. You died because life was cruel to you. But I survived. And I'm going to make your memory worthwhile." The wind rustled the leaves of the big tree growing near the grave, and for a moment, I felt like she was listening to me. "I'm going to break the cycle, Mama. If I have children someday, they'll know what real love is. They'll know they're valuable. They'll grow up without fear." I went home with a lighter heart than it had been in years. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It still hurt, still had scars that might never completely fade. But it was peace. It was the certainty that I had transformed my pain into purpose, that I had broken the chains that bound me. And now I could help other people break theirs. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from a school in Louisville offering a scholarship to study social work. James Thompson had recommended me. It was my chance to officially transform my experience into a tool to help others. To be the voice I didn't have when I needed it. To be the strength that other girls like Sarah and like me needed. And for the first time in my life, when I thought about the future, I smiled. I'm here on the same porch where I started this story. Same wooden boards, same tin roof that makes noise when it rains. But everything has changed. I'm 82 years old now. My hair is white. My hands are wrinkled, but my eyes no longer have fear. Beside me is my granddaughter, Emma, 16 years old. The same age I was that night with the hammer. But when I look at her, I see something I never had at that age: security, confidence, the certainty that she is loved. Emma is reading a book for school, lying on the swing my husband Thomas installed here 40 years ago. Thomas, a man who taught me that touch can be gentle, that voice can be soft, that love doesn't hurt. "Grandma," Emma says, looking at me over her book, "why do you always stare at that old photo?" It's the same photo I showed at the beginning. Me at 16, 3 days after the night that changed everything. But now, when I look at it, I no longer see the broken girl I thought I saw. I see the warrior who was born that night. Because that girl in the photo saved me, I answer. How? She decided to fight back. She decided she was worth more than people said she was worth. And thanks to that decision, you're here today. Emma frowns, thoughtful. "Grandma, you always say we have to be strong. But you never told me why." I look at my granddaughter, this beautiful, intelligent girl who's going to college next year, who has never been yelled at, never been diminished, never been taught to be afraid. And I think about everything she doesn't know about her family. Someday I'll tell the whole story, I say. When you're a little older. Is it a sad story? It started sad. I answer, putting the photo in my apron pocket. But it ended with hope. Emma goes back to her book, and I stare at the horizon. In the distance, I see a girl walking down the street. I can't see her face, but something about the way she walks, head down, quick steps, reminds me of myself decades ago. Tomorrow I'm going to find out who she is. I'm going to see if she needs help. Because that's my mission now. To look for girls who walk like I used to walk. To talk to them like I wish someone had talked to me. To tell them what it took me 16 years to discover. You are stronger than you imagine. The cycle stopped with me. And now my strength protects other people. Yes, it should have been from the beginning. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for giving me the chance to turn my pain into purpose. Maybe you know someone who's going through what I went through. Maybe you yourself are in a similar situation. If that's the case, I want you to engrave these words in your heart. You weren't born to be beaten. You weren't born to be afraid. You weren't born to be small. You were born to be free. And if today you don't yet have the strength to fight back, that's okay. I didn't have it for a long time either. But one day, it could be tomorrow, it could be a year from now, you're going to find that strength inside you. And when you find it, use it. Because the world needs your light. The world needs your strength. The world needs you whole, not broken. If this story touched your heart, leave me a comment telling me about it. And subscribe to the channel because Grandma Dorothy has many more stories to tell, stories of pain that became strength, stories of dark nights that became bright mornings, stories that might save someone who needs to hear them. Until next time, my dears. And remember, you are stronger than you imagine.